You're listening to the Bold Dreams Held Loosely podcast. My name is Taryn Watts, and in this episode, I am joined by my co-host, Michelle Theriault, and our guest, Dawn Harvie. Dawn is a chronic pain recovery coach. Through her own journey of recovery from chronic pain, she became absolutely fascinated with this topic and has spent the past several years diving into this topic and learning more. Now she has this both this strong belief and these skills and tools to be able to help others who are struggling with chronic pain, so that they can improve and even recover just like she did. So she uses her skills as a certified mind rebel coach, as well as everything she has learned about chronic pain, to help you understand the role of the brain in chronic pain and how to overcome it. Dawn has also completed training in pain reprocessing therapy through the Pain Psychology Center. And she's also done training with internal family systems therapy level 1 through the IFS Institute. In the words of Dawn, what bigger and bolder dream is there than to be free from chronic pain? We hope you enjoy this episode. And if you are interested in working more with Dawn, you can find all of her details beneath this episode. Enjoy. Dawn, let's just dive in here. My first question for you is, how do you define chronic pain?
Yeah. So chronic pain is pain that persists beyond 3 months, beyond the regular healing time. It's often associated with things like anxiety and depression, which is really understandable, or physical impairment. So you're not able to do the things that you regularly do. And lastly, it's not associated with any other diagnosis. So the symptoms cannot be accounted for a structural issue like a tumor, a fracture, an infection. So that's the basic criteria for chronic pain.
Okay. And Dawn, can you share with us this is truly your life's work. And so often with our life's work, there's quite a story behind that. There's something that brought you to this point, to becoming a chronic pain recovery coach. And I would just love to hear, because I actually don't know the full story. Michelle, I'm not sure if you know the full story, but I would just love to hear what brought you here.
Yeah. So in 2019, I slipped and fell and broke my wrist, and went to the hospital, had to get it set, and then I had to have surgery to hold the bone together. And I had so much pain. Like I was envisioning that, the cast was scraping through my skin. It was just so painful. And even my fingers to the touch, like even if you were to just very gently brush my finger, the pain would be like shocking. And I was eventually diagnosed with something called complex regional pain syndrome, which is basically a name for you've got pain. We're not entirely sure why, but we're going to give it a name because people like to have names for their symptoms. And then that following winter, I discovered that I was having panic attacks every time I had to go outside in the snow and the ice. And so I sought out a therapist, and eventually she introduced me to this concept of pain being created by the brain. So all pain is real. All pain is real, but also all pain is created by the brain. And so I just started delving into this whole world discovered that many of my other symptoms, like chronic plantar fasciitis, was due to this idea of chronic pain, which comes in different names now. So I might call it chronic pain. I prefer to call it neuroplastic pain, because neuroplastic now has really come to be associated with you can change this. It's also called mind body syndrome. Some people know it as TMS from Dr. John Sarno, who I would maybe consider the father of this. He was certainly not the first to come up with this idea that pain comes from the brain, but he was one of the biggest proponents, starting in the 1980s through till his death in 2017. So I think I've gotten a little ahead of myself
Mhm.
there, but I get really excited about this topic. And actually, I was thinking, am I excited about chronic pain? That seems like crazy, but pain is really important. Pain is really, really important. It's a message that something's going on, um, and it's all about the brain. And the brain, I am learning, is just incredibly powerful and absolutely fascinating. So, okay, I'll let you ask another question, because I could just talk about this all day long.
Okay, Dawn, I have a question for you before we go further down your story. I'm curious about what was your first internal reaction to the idea that the pain you were still experiencing might not be structural, I think is what you called it. Like it might not be because there's an actual break that's still healing.
Great
Yeah,
question.
Yeah, what
yeah.
was your first reaction?
Yeah.
It is a great question, because often when people, when the suggestion is that, like, this is coming, from your brain, and sometimes people don't explain it quite as well. Maybe they're like, the intimation is you're making it up, or that's the
Mhm.
understanding. That's not the case. It is way back in your, unconscious parts of your brain. So I was actually very open to it. I was very curious. I was like anybody suffering from chronic pain, looking for a solution, feeling very frustrated, um, but also very open to the idea. And I do a presentation on this, and it's one of the opening lines is, come to this with a really open mind, and do a little research, do some digging, but try to be open to the idea, because it has the potential to change your life if you're suffering from chronic pain.
I have so many questions. Um, can we actually dig in a little bit into this, like to the science of it? I'm so curious. So so when you say pain, is the expression pain is in the brain? Is that the expression, Don, or did I say that wrong?
So all of our experiences are created in the brain,
Yeah.
and that includes pain. So I say pain is created in or by the brain as a message. It's the
Yeah.
only way our brain has to deliver certain messages. So when we get structural pain, there's a whole system at work. So um, structural pain is registered by the pain receptors. That message goes up into the brain, and then the brain makes a determination on various different factors. So, what's happening in the body, what's happening outside in the environment, and also what has happened to us previously through our experience, our memories, things like that. And then it determines, do we or don't we have pain? So in my case, one of the really interesting factors was I was walking two dogs when I broke my wrist. And I was about 20-minute walk from home. It was quite early in the morning and there was nobody out in the streets. And so I picked up the leashes with my good hand and I started walking. And I was so laser focused on getting home that for those 20 minutes, I felt no pain whatsoever. I got home. I actually changed because I was dripping wet. I got on a bus and went to the hospital. During that time, I wasn't really experiencing pain because, again, I was laser focused on getting myself to the hospital. Once I hit the hospital, I was in tears. The pain was incredible. It was a really interesting experience. And when I started to think about that, I thought, wow, the brain was saying, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You've got to be focused. We can't have pain because right now we have to do something much more important. And once I had the opportunity, the quiet, I was in a safe space, I felt pain. So quite incredible. The brain can decide when we have pain and when we don't have pain.
Wow. Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle. Yeah.
I was going to say, Dawn, you mentioned, I don't know if this was like just an example, but you mentioned 3 months as a window of healing where you would be, you would maybe still be feeling pain from the healing process. I'm sure there's a range for whatever is physically going on, but can you tell me where like that, how does someone know what the actual healing time or the window they should be feeling actual pain is?
Yeah. So doctors obviously, like we've for many, many, many years, we've seen patients with broken bones. And then we can see via an x-ray that a broken bone heals within 6 to 8 weeks. And when you look at people who don't end up with chronic pain, you can see that after 3 months, generally they're much better. For others, the pain continues. So it's just basically a body of experience from the medical community. Yeah. Yeah. For some people, it continues to be chronic. And there are certain factors involved. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have any of these factors that you will have chronic pain, but there is an association. So, for example, adverse childhood experiences. So childhood trauma, like neglect, abuse of any sort, having a parent in a penal institution, having a parent who has mental health issues. Other things that can contribute to having chronic pain is trauma or stress in adulthood. Having a variety of personality traits. So if you're a perfectionist or if you're a people pleaser, if you have a really strong inner critic, if you have really super high expectations of yourself, if you feel responsible for everybody in your life, those types of personality traits can contribute to having chronic pain long term. Other things include repressed emotions. That too can be a factor, as can a conditioned response. So just like we learn a habit, the brain can learn chronic pain. and it can become sensitized. And so then, your bar for chronic pain is lowered. And so it takes less for you to feel pain than previously.
Hmm. Um, I'm so okay. So I'm so curious, Dawn. What is the journey? What was the journey like for you to recover? Like
Yeah.
what had to
Yeah.
happen? What had to shift? What did you have to do? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So it's really important to know that this is not necessarily an easy journey.
I can
Um,
imagine. I can
yeah.
imagine it's actually one of the harder journeys we will take as a human.
Yeah. For a very tiny percentage, and you hear this, kind of in the realm that I work in. For a very tiny percentage, they may read a book, either John Sarno's book or Alan Gordon's book, and then within a week they're better. For others, it's a lot of work in terms of trying to teach your brain that it's safe. Because all of these things really are the brain's interpretation of not being safe, of being in danger. So you can imagine I'm a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm trying to be perfect, you can imagine what my brain is like. If I'm not perfect, my brain is like, danger, danger. So that sends an alert through my body. And then, of course, I end up with plantar fasciitis or black back pain or whatever. Um, so it's a lot of brain training. Um, Thankfully, the brain is neuroplastic at almost any age. People can recover at 70 and 80. That is very possible. Self-compassion is really key too. I
Yeah.
had to do a lot of work in that area to develop more self-compassion in terms of the perfectionism and the inner critic, things like that, getting things wrong, sending messages of safety to my brain. So reminding myself I'm safe, I'm in a safe environment. Sure, maybe I made a mistake, but it's okay. I can take care of myself. Um, and then there are a variety of different specific techniques outside of kind of more of those um, kind of brain training techniques. And that includes pain reprocessing therapy, which there was actually a study done recently on this in back pain patients. And it was incredibly, the results were quite amazing. So they had in total somewhere in the vicinity of 150 folks in 3 different groups. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked, but this
Yeah.
is a really cool study. So the Boulder back pain study. So they compared pain reprocessing therapy to an open placebo. So people knew they were getting a placebo to just the usual care. And so the group who got pain reprocessing therapy, where you do things like somatic tracking and graded exposure, you use a little humor to get a positive effect, and you deliver messages of safety to your brain. Those folks, there was a 98% improvement, and 73% were nearly pain free. And the results held even after a year follow up, whereas the results were not quite as stellar for the placebo group, and even less so for the usual care group. So pain reprocessing therapy, there's emotional awareness and expression therapy, internal family systems therapy. These are all various ways of dealing with chronic pain too. And in some cases, the emotions behind the chronic pain. So for me, I I basically threw a little bit of everything at my
Mhm.
chronic pain. And I really liked, for me personally, I really liked the pain reprocessing therapy because there's it felt like I didn't quite have to go into those emotions so deep, but in the end, I found that no, you've got to do some of the emotional work, and so I delved into that as well, and I would consider myself recovered. Now, does that mean I never get chronic pain? No. Like, in fact, something happened in April, um, something that I wasn't expecting, and it was all emotional based, and I
Okay,
could like just
fantastic.
have this gripping thing, like something, like this thing happened, um, and I was, I was knowledgeable about all of this, like knowing everything about chronic pain, and yet I still ended up with really, really pain, like terrible pain in the front of my hips, which is often where I will get my pain if something emotional is going on. So, um, it's- and even though I knew all of this, I was like, oh, I wonder what I did. I do something? Of course,
Mm.
I didn't. Like I did nothing different that day than any other day. I knew there was an emotional thing. I knew that I was like trying not to think about it. And so I spent about 4 weeks before I recovered from that, telling my brain it was okay, working on the emotional piece, doing some journaling, which is not my favorite thing to do, but is definitely one of the things that one can do for chronic pain, and just kind of like writing all of the feelings and things like that. So it's in some respects it's a life journey. Nowadays, chronic pain doesn't stop me from walking, going places, spending time in museums, because those were things I used to avoid because of the chronic plantar fasciitis. So definitely not an easy journey. It can be a lot of work, but you don't want to be a perfectionist either when you're doing this work.
Mhm.
It's it's actually a little bit of a contradiction, right? Because you desperately want to fix it. But if you're trying to fix it, if you're focusing on it, if you're frustrated with it, if you're frightened of it, all of those things are sending messages to your brain that you're in danger. So you've got to try and kind of rein it in and say, okay, yeah, there's some fear there. Okay, what is the fear about? Journal about it, sit on it, meditate on it, relax with it, allow it to be there. It's really important. So there, it, you know, in my brain, some days it sounds like a really simple thing to do, but it isn't. It takes practice. You need to, because you're retraining your brain, you have to practice a little bit, not like a world class athlete, a little bit more relaxed than that, actually, a lot more relaxed than that. But practice, 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 because I'm sure you have heard this before. The brain is like Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. So if you want to get that positive, you've got to really keep practicing to overcome that negative.
I've actually never heard that before, Dawn. Can you just repeat that so my brain can fully grasp what you just said?
Yeah. The brain is like Velcro for negative. So it sticks.
Yeah.
but Teflon for positive just slides off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And there's a very good reason for that. I mean, for our survival, we had to pay way more attention to the negative than the positive, because paying attention to the positive wouldn't keep us alive.
Right.
Whereas paying attention to the lion, making a creaking noise in the bush, that would keep us alive.
Mm. Michelle,
Wait,
go ahead.
I've
Yeah.
got one. So outside of the scenario where you've broken an arm and you should have healed and you're still feeling pain, outside of that, like say if you're really unsure why you're feeling pain, like there was no incident that started the pain, whether it's in your hips, your stomach, your head, your neck, what would give someone a clue that this is the realm we're talking about, like emotional pain, the brain sending messages, versus something that they have to really pursue it, like down like the medical route, like advocating, like say tests are coming back negative.
Yeah.
There's like almost in my mind two routes to go down. One where you
Yeah.
really give what you're saying a chance, and the other route for some people, like, no, I'm going to advocate for myself and I'm going to get more tests. Like, what's a hint? Which way to go?
Yeah.
Good question.
So in our work, you always have to rule out a structural issue to start. And then you rule in neuroplastic pain or mind body syndrome or whatever, psychophysiologic disorder, whatever term you like. As I noted at the beginning, I prefer neuroplastic pain because it gives you the idea that it can change. So you want to rule out a structural issue. So if your doctors have done all the testing and have come back and said these are all negative, then you want to start looking at evidence that this is neuroplastic pain. What are some of the evidence pieces? So it started without any physical precipitation. Now, of course, we're assuming there that you've confirmed that you don't have cancer or tumor or anything like that. But so this morning, I woke up with a bit of a twinge in my back. I was feeling a little anxious about doing this podcast, and I slept the same way I did every other night this year and the year before. My bed hadn't changed. My pillows hadn't changed. Nothing had changed. I knew that this was precipitated by nothing physical. So that's one factor.
Or Dawn, if it is
Yeah.
physical, it goes on beyond that time, right? Like for example, when you hurt your hand and it was beyond the 3 months, right?
Yeah. So in that case, though, it wasn't physical,
Oh,
right?
I see.
So,
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So maybe we'll backtrack a little bit. So I broke my wrist. The bone healed.
Okay.
I had visible confirmation from the doctor. We had x-rays. The bone had healed. There was nothing going on except why on earth, when I very gently touched my finger, did I have this extreme pain after everything had healed? Well, that was because my brain had some idea that there was still danger involved.
Right. Okay.
So yeah. So when I woke up this morning with my little twinge in my back, there was no physical precipitation to that. Like I hadn't been lifting heavy boxes. I was sleeping. I was sleeping in the same way that I had been for months and days and years. Because I do this work all the time, I was like, oh, hello. I know what you are. You're
Familiar?
a little signal saying, yeah, there's something a little emotional going on. I'm a little nervous. And when I sat with that and just said, okay, I hear you. I get it. And we're going to be okay. I don't have the back pain anymore. The twinge has gone.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we say fit criteria. So functional, inconsistent, triggered. So functional. If the symptoms begin without physical precipitation, if the symptoms persist in the case of my hand once the injury has healed, because all injuries heal, like broken bones and, infection,
Right.
things like that, they all heal. Um, if the symptoms occur in many parts of the body. So many people with chronic pain patients might have things like fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines. They'll have multiple symptoms. If that's the case, then that's a hint that this might be neuroplastic pain.
Oh, fascinating.
Inconsistent. So, for example, if you wake up in the morning and the pain is there, but it disappears at the end of the day, that's a signal. If it occurs when you're under a lot of stress, so if you get more pain when you're under more stress, that's another indication because it's inconsistent. If it were something structural, it would be consistent all along. Like it wouldn't go up in the
Mm-hmm.
morning and down in the evening. And if the symptoms are non-existent or minimal after some sort of therapy, so like physiotherapy or acupuncture, part of this is related to the placebo effect. So if you get treatment, you're there with a caring practitioner, you have an explanation for what's going on, you have a treatment, you have hope. So, if it gets better after you've been to see the acupuncturist, but then it returns maybe a week and then you have to go to the acupuncturist again, and then it goes away, it comes back. That too is another indication. And then the last category is triggered. So, for example, if symptoms are triggered by something not related to the symptoms. So, for example, let's say you get back pain when you're going to your mother-in-law's house. Just using that
Mm-hmm.
as an example, not that it's happening for anybody, but there's a trigger and you're getting back pain. And why does it only happen when you're going to your mother's? Foods, weather, all sorts of things like that. If your pain is triggered by that or your symptoms is triggered by that, then again, it's another hint, another piece of evidence that this is neuroplastic pain. And a lot of people think, yeah, but I eat something and it goes right through me, or, those who have digestive issues. And one of the things that is interesting in many of these cases is that people will start off and they'll find that it's only this and this that create the issue. And then it's this and this and this and this. And then it's this and 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 this. So if you've got some sort of a problem and more things are starting to create that same issue, again, that's another hint that this is not a structural issue. And then the last one, we can do some exercises as we're trying to figure some of this out, is if you imagine something. So if you imagine the trigger, if you imagine that you're on the way to your mother-in-law's house, you're imagining it, very clear picture, and all of a sudden the back pain starts. Okay, well, you're imagining it. So that's, again, another really big piece of evidence. So we collect evidence to demonstrate to ourselves that this is neuroplastic pain. I had to do that when I started this work. Like my hand, I I couldn't write with my hand. And so, whenever I thought about even having to journal or do any of that sort of thing, I would get increased pain in my hand. But if I were having a glass of wine with friends, it didn't bother me at all. So, so again, that's an indicator. Yeah. So there are all kinds of ways of kind of narrowing this down, but you definitely want to ensure that there's nothing structural going on. Sorry, I feel like
Wow.
rambling a little bit, but
Oh
No,
no.
you've got me. You've got my whole attention, Dawn.
We're fascinated. Like,
Fascinated.
oh my gosh. Dawn, I know that you said when this idea was presented to you, you were really open, you were curious, you just wanted answers. But I am imagining that a lot of people
Me too, Michelle.
would be so resistant and
Yeah.
almost even angry.
Yeah.
Like,
Me too. That's exactly what I was thinking.
yeah,
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 what do you, yes, like just take that and run with it. Tell,
yeah. So it's a really hard thing to accept that our brain can create these symptoms, including symptoms like non epileptic seizures. The brain is all powerful.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Wizard of Oz, right?
It's incredible, really.
All
It's incredible.
powerful until you pull the curtain back and discover that your brain is behind all of it. Um, so so yeah, there are some people who are resistant, and you have to accept that that is where they are. Um, it's it's human nature to believe that there is a structural issue for pain. That's just almost like it's ingrained in us. And then, of course, our medical system also promotes that. And we, as patients or clients, promote that too, because we want a name for whatever is going on, or, we want an explanation. We don't want to be told it's in your brain. Like we don't want to hear that.
Mhm.
We want to hear it's X and this is what you do for it, and it'll be fine after that. And unfortunately, the body doesn't quite work that way. The brain certainly doesn't work that way. The brain has its own agenda. Its agenda is to keep us safe. If it gets a hint of danger, then it can create physical symptoms for us, trying to get our attention, because the brain can't say, hey, you're feeling nervous about this podcast
Mhm.
today, Dawn.
Mhm.
So, chill. No, it's like back pain. And then I'm like, okay, something's up. Right. So yeah, it's, you, you really hope people will be open to this idea, will at least give it some consideration, will recognize that they're being told over and over again that their tests are all normal, um, and recognize that their symptoms are inconsistent, and start to maybe give this some thought. But yeah, some people are resistant, and I completely understand that. I mean, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, right? We're just predisposed to thinking there's something structural, because we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to keep ourselves safe. Yeah.
mm. You said actually repeated this line. You said all pain is real pain. And then you repeated it for emphasis. Like what message do you think, I mean, aside from just that phrase, but like what message do you think would be helpful for people who are resistant to hear?
Yeah. Yeah. So often people get the understanding, whether incorrectly or not, right? Because um, unfortunately, some practitioners can inadvertently put fear in folks, like, oh, you have disc degeneration and therefore you're going to have this pain for the rest of your life. Um, and studies have demonstrated that is not necessarily the case, depending on any individual situation. Um, but understanding that all of our experiences are created in the brain, understanding that chronic pain is not a choice, that this happens in the non-conscious, unconscious parts of our brain. Like, you're not crazy
Mm-hmm.
if you have chronic
Mm-hmm.
pain. And it's hard because there's a lot of stigma attached to chronic
Mm-hmm.
pain, right? Um, People don't believe you. People think you're faking it. All kinds of things. But no, chronic pain is a real thing. People are really feeling pain. They're feeling a lot of other things too, potentially stigmatized. They're probably anxious, depressed because their life has changed so drastically because of this chronic pain. So yeah, I would just like, I would say, yeah, I completely get it. This is a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around. There are lots of resources. Just have a look, see if this resonates with you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's okay. Again, we have to meet people where they're at. And maybe over time and just being open, they'll come to this realization. But some people never do. um you know um and I feel incredibly sad.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could somehow say no, it's true, but people have to come to this on their own time and in their own way. um with gentle encouragement, sometimes that can happen. Just, are you open to this way of thinking, to this way of seeing things? But again, it's hard because not all practitioners, not all medical practitioners
Mm-hmm.
are even aware of this. In fact, many of them are not. That's starting to change. Thank you to people like Dr. Howard Schubiner, Alan Gordon, Dr. John Strax, Dr. David Clark, and a number of other doctors. It's slowly starting to change, but it's it's a hard thing to change too, because it's a systemic change, right? The medical system has been in place for quite a while now. They have all of their ideology set up, and so trying to introduce something new and have folks really take it on and believe it takes some doing. So, there are a lot of factors stacked against people really taking this in. I could say, is this something that you would consider? And they might go to the doctor, and the doctor may say, oh, she's saying it's all in your head. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, I sort of am saying it's all in your head, but not in the way that it's all in your head and you're making it up.
Not the
I,
dismissive way, in the almost the
yeah.
like empowered way.
Yeah. It's in your brain and you can change it
You can access it.
if
Yeah.
it's neuroplastic pain. Yeah.
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 Oh, geez. Okay. This is taking me back to uh, for years and years and years, I had chronic strep throat, constant, 7 to 10 times a year, constantly, constant chronic strep throat. And I approached this when I'm hearing you talk, Dawn, you've approached this from such a scientific way. And in me, of course, I approached it from a very spiritual way, in a very woo-woo way. But we got to the same result, and I'm seeing this intersection, which I love. There was a time in my life where I which was really into Reiki and learning about the chakras. And I learned about the throat chakra being your truth center. And that is where I had, this chronic strep throat. And during those years of my life, it was a time where I was so scared to speak my truest truth. I was so scared to be the woo version of me, the expressive version of me. And I was so constrained and put into this little box and terrified to speak my truth. And intuitively, I knew that this was the key to everything. And slowly but surely began taking those steps forward to speak my truth and share who I really was with the world. And the strep throat never returned. Gone.
Yeah.
Gone. It's wild.
Doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah. So as you say that, it's so interesting because sometimes our symptoms are related to kind of what's going on. So for example, folks who have irritable bowel syndrome, or even just have temporary runs, let's just say, you know, might be because they're scared shitless, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
People who have back pain, it may be because their boss is, like a pain in their back,
Oh,
or
wow.
maybe
Yeah.
they're feeling stabbed in the back or something to that effect. People who have sciatica or difficulty with their sit bones sitting, maybe something is a pain in their ass, right? So it's not unusual, and I don't know this for sure, but maybe that's how these expressions came about.
Right.
And often, right? People will have issues with the neck, the throat, something like that, if they're trying to hold down anger, or if they feel like they can't speak up for
Yeah.
themselves, those sorts of things. So, yeah. And honestly, I don't go down that woo woo path of Reiki or the spiritual, kind of direction. But from my perspective, if it works, if it helps you with the chronic pain, then more power to you
Mm-hmm.
and to your methods.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't believe there's any one way to, well, okay, I really don't believe there's any one road to recovery here. I think there are some components that really help. One of those components is this educational piece, right? Understanding how the brain can have an impact on our physical well-being. I think that really helps. I think being kinder to ourselves, gentler with ourselves, I think that also is fairly important. Um, but whatever other method, whether it's emotional expression, pain reprocessing therapy, Reiki,
Mm-hmm.
chakras,
Mm-hmm.
um, if that's the way that you recover, I'm like all for it. Because my bottom
Mm-hmm.
my bottom line is, what do you need to get well, and how can you get well? I'm a really, really strong believer in, we are our own best healing agent. We know how to heal ourselves if we listen.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn, you said a couple times that pain is a message or a signal. And if it's structural, like if you put your hand on the hot stove, you get a signal to it's very literal, please remove your hand. That's what the pain is saying.
Yeah.
But when it's neuroplastic pain, I'm guessing, that pain is a message still. How would someone begin to connect to what the message is that their brain is giving them through the neuroplastic pain?
Yeah. So there are a number of ways. So, for example, taking a look at childhood stressors, childhood trauma. So, doing the adverse childhood experiences 10-question quiz to give you an indication, because um, it's been discovered that these ACEs, as I'll call them, adverse childhood experiences, are correlated with anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, as well as heart disease and cancer. And there is something like a threefold increased risk for chronic pain conditions if you have ACEs versus those without. So, so definitely giving some consideration to, whatever trauma you may have suffered as a child. And actually, the 10-point question from the ACEs study doesn't even consider things like bullying
Mm-hmm.
or performance expectations, for example, in school or in sports, things like that. So giving some consideration to that. If there is significant childhood trauma, then working with a therapist who is familiar with this type of model of chronic pain is really useful. If you have adult trauma or chronic stress, so basically it's just looking through those 5 components and kind of like delving into it and what feels right. If for me initially, I was not ready to do a lot of that deep emotional work. So I started with kind of somatic tracking and graded exposure. So, just kind of, okay, where's the symptom? All right. So my tweak in my back pain, okay, it's there. And just what is it doing? Recognizing that it's not doing anything, recognizing that I am healthy, I am well. Um um yeah, so repressed emotions, again, you may need a therapist familiar with this model of chronic pain to help you through some of that. Lifestyle changes may be necessary. So, if you're in a position where you're in a situation of chronic pain, if you're able to remove yourself from that situation, then that might be an option. Finding resources for yourself, that might be an option. There, like, literally, there are quite a number of things that you can do. Setting boundaries, especially if you're a people pleaser,
Mm-hmm.
setting boundaries and being very clear on those boundaries, really challenging to do, but definitely something that you can start with. And there are so many resources out there now. Um, my website, which I know you'll share in
Yeah, we'll share in the notes. Yeah.
yeah, in the notes, has a ton of resources, and so I really welcome people to go and explore and see what maybe feels right to them, where to start. Um, the educational piece for me is probably one of the first place to start, because that will
Mm-hmm.
give you a bit of an understanding of kind of what's happening in the brain. There are lots of really great books, little videos, a couple of fantastic documentaries available through, here in Canada and the US, Canopy, which is available through libraries for free, has All the Rage, which is one of the first films on chronic pain, and it's a Dr. John Sarno pain. And even though we've discovered that some of the theories that Dr. John Sarno espoused are not actually accurate, his methodology, which was education and journaling, were and still are very useful to chronic pain. So, Michelle, I'm sorry. I think I went off on a very different trail. I hope I answered your question.
Totally, Dawn. Totally.
As a coach, how do you work with your clients, Dawn? And perhaps even like what stage in their journey do they have to be at to work with a coach like you in this realm?
Yeah. So most of the people who come to me already have an indication that they have neuroplastic
Yeah.
pain.
There's no convincing. You're not right. They're
Yeah,
aware. Yeah.
there may be some educational pieces around that.
Yeah.
And definitely I work with them on the evidence piece because to some extent, um, you have to have a belief that you can get well,
Mm-hmm.
that you can recover. And so building the evidence sheet is part of the process. Of course, asking questions, kind of getting to, what are you feeling and what are you experiencing and how is that impacting your life, are also important ways to kind of dig a little bit deeper and see if there's anything underneath the surface. So, but I am trained in pain reprocessing therapy, internal family systems therapy, emotional expression and awareness therapy. And so sometimes we'll use those techniques as necessary, working on self-compassion, and retraining the brain. So, yeah.
I have another question, but I'm kind of taking a detour. So, Michelle, do you have any other questions around like this chronic pain piece?
Yeah, I do. Kinda. But it doesn't feel like there's a particular order.
Yeah, no, go for it, Michelle.
Okay.
Go for it.
This is actually something I was chatting with Dawn about a little bit before today. And I was just thinking about, like, you mentioned before, Taryn, how this is like, the reality is actually so empowering. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there might be some resistance to the idea, but the idea itself is actually such an empowering, um, such an empowering idea that you actually can rewire yourself. You actually can take your healing into your own hands. Um, you aren't stuck in chronic pain. And I was thinking about the implications in relation to emotional pain. And Dawn, I would love for you to share what you see as the connections between chronic physical pain, emotional pain, like how that all
Mm-hmm.
intersects. And what does that mean is possible for us?
Yeah. Yeah. So there was I mean, there have been a number of studies. Actually, there have been a lot of studies, and I've barely quoted a single one of them. Well, I have several, but okay. So in 2011, Ethan Cross did a study looking at emotional pain versus physical pain. And he took students who had experienced a recent but unwanted breakup.
Okay.
And they were subjected to two different conditions. One condition was they were given a warm stimulus on their arm that would cause pain. And the second condition was they were shown a picture of their ex, while thinking of the rejection. And after receiving each of these conditions, the researchers did an fMRI of their brains. And what they discovered was that the fMRIs were very, very similar. And so that made the researchers think that, those who experienced emotional pain had the same activation in the brain as those who experienced the physical pain. And so basically that leads to the idea that emotional pain can cause physical pain. So there's a real link there. And there are several other studies as well that demonstrate similar types of things. So yeah, emotions, and we know this. We know this because when you're embarrassed, what happens? You get this red flush, this heat. Well, that's a physical sensation to an emotional situation, the feeling of embarrassment. If you're about to go on a first date with somebody, or if you're about to step on a huge stage and give a talk to folks, you might feel butterflies in your stomach. Like you might really feel that physical sensation.
You might have to run to the bathroom every couple minutes.
Right? Exactly. So this is emotion coming out in the body as physical sensations. So, there are definite links. And the brain, as I said, is all powerful. The brain can create any symptom. And we don't necessarily have any control over that until we really start to piece things together, to understand how the brain works, to understand where these symptoms are coming from, to have our evidence sheet, and also have knowledge that the doctors have considered everything and we do not have a structural problem. Yeah.
Do you think it's reasonable to, if this is true for neuroplastic pain and following, education and, take your pick of methodologies that have been shown to create healing or change, do you think it's reasonable to consider that a similar perspective and methodology could help someone heal deep emotional pain? Like, even say they're not even experiencing physical pain, but you just consider the way the brain works, the way the brain is wired, the way it's so neuroplastic it can change. Do you think, I know I'm just asking for an opinion, but do you think it applies?
So Dr. Howard Schubiner has a book called Unlearn Your Pain, but he also has a book called Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression. So within the medical community that understand or work in this methodology of chronic pain, there is definitely a belief that yes, that some of these same techniques and the same education can assist people who have anxiety, depression, PTSD even. Not to say that it isn't easy, and not to say that you shouldn't have the support of a good therapist. Even better if it's somebody who understands, this theory. But definitely, yeah, there is belief out there for sure that is the case. And I know too, when I when I started suffering panic attacks after I broke my wrist, and the next winter I started having panic attacks going out in the rain or the snow and the ice, and you know what our weather is like. You never know what you're going to get. Like it was in many respects a conditioned response, right? And so it took a lot. It's still a work in progress because I haven't, it's hard to practice 365 days of the year, because thankfully we do not have snow and ice 365 days of the year. So it took a lot of practice and graded exposure and imagining being safe, and
Mhm.
also, if it was really, really slippery, and I didn't have to go out, then no, I stayed safe because it was just easier. So yeah, that model certainly was something that I used in my recovery from that panic with snow and ice.
Mm.
Yeah.
Dawn, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the power also of visualization. And I'm wondering if that, we talk about moving through the emotions, moving through the like sitting with our emotions, and like that's one like kind of portal out of our pain. The quote, which I love this, the quote from Robert Frost: "The only way out, or the best way out, is through." And I think about that in terms of emotions and also pain. But there's this other flip side of visualizing, and I'm sure there's so much science that I don't know about, but visualizing yourself pain free or healthy, whatever it might be. um Dawn, I'm wondering, I would love your perspective on that.
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned imagining the situation, right? So
Yeah.
one of the ways of testing whether or not this is chronic pain is imagining. So, for example, if you have back pain and bending over gives you back pain, and you imagine bending over and you get back pain,
Hmm.
there's a good indication there that it's neuroplastic pain. But in the same way, that is one method of graded exposure, right? So imagine that you're not bending over that far. You're just bending over a little bit, and you visualize and you remind yourself, this is not harmful. My body is perfectly healthy. I am safe. I am fine. And you continue to kind of visualize, and maybe you go a little bit further as you practice. So yeah, I think there is very much a space for visualization in this. It's one of the activities I did in terms of heading out into the snow and ice. I visualized myself walking in the snow, walking in the ice,
Mhm.
being safe, being capable, knowing that if I fell, you know, I would be okay, because now I understand chronic pain. Because prior to that, like when I initially had this panic with the snow and ice, it was because I was thinking like, oh my God, what happens if I break my wrist again? And then I have to go through this terrible year of recovery where, and like, for that whole first year, I had no understanding of chronic pain. And it was awful. Like
Imagine.
it really,
Yeah.
you know, um, caused a lot of difficulty for me. I lost a position that I was really looking forward to doing. So that really sidelined, my career at that point. I was unable to do so much because it was my dominant hand that was broken. The pain was excruciating, so I wasn't sleeping. So, like, initially, I was just like, "Oh, I can't go outside in the snow and ice because I just don't want to break anything again because I don't want this
Mhm.
to." happen again. I don't want to have to go through this again. But then once I started to do the work to understand the brain, then I was able to visualize and visualize too, like, oh, whoops, I fell. Oh, I broke something. Oh, this isn't going to happen in the same way because now I have this set of tools and I have this set of techniques, and I'm really capable now of working through it. And I know that because, as I say, I'm a human being, and so I'm going to have periods of periodic pain, like the hip pain I had in April or the back pain I had this morning. And so, yeah, maybe it'll last for a couple of weeks, but I know that in the end it will go away. So, visualization was key for me in my recovery and is very useful. It's a great way to start graded exposure. And start imagining yourself doing things and imagining yourself doing it with joy, right? There's also a piece about doing it with a lightness and doing it with joy and happiness too, as opposed to being stuck in the pain. So yeah.
Ooh. Okay, I'm going to ask my question that's actually I feel like this is a question I have been sitting with for 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And it's not about chronic pain, but it's about pain. So when I was pregnant with my first baby, Cooper, with my first child, I was introduced to a birthing technique called hypnobirthing. I don't know if you've ever heard, Michelle knows this. Don't know if you've ever heard this done, but hypnobirthing, I did the classes, I read all the books, and hypnobirthing, like the theory says that you can, like, I watched videos of women who were birthing their babies, and I swear it looked like they were having an orgasm. Like they breathed their babies out pain-free. And I was convinced that would be my experience. I was convinced I was going to hypnobirth. I was going to breathe. I had all the messaging and the sayings on my window. I was going to have this beautiful home birth and I was going to breathe my baby out. And I had the complete opposite experience. It was the most excruciating pain of my life. And I've been sitting inside this question for 10 years. Like, is that even possible?
Yes.
Is it possible? Yeah.
Yes.
And I believe you when you say yes.
Yes.
Can you share?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, and oh gosh, I've forgotten the name, but there was a woman in, gosh, Sweden, I want to say. She did a presentation at one of the conferences I attended on chronic pain. Absolutely amazing. So she did a study, and it was actually with hypnotherapy.
Okay.
And if I recall correctly, breast cancer patients. And so she had a group who had hypnotherapy and a group who didn't. And there was demonstration that those who had the hypnotherapy experienced less pain than those who didn't. So I can't speak to whether or not it'll feel like an orgasm when you're birthing a baby, but I can say that with significant work, with training your brain, training your mind, you can have a different experience. If you do hypnotherapy, or if you really work at many of these techniques that I've mentioned, training your brain and visualizing, understanding the role of the brain in pain. it's very possible in my opinion. There's even with people who have structural pain, having an understanding of how the brain works, how the brain contributes to pain, and working with various different techniques, mindfulness and meditation and relaxation and visualization, affirmations, um, all of these techniques, they can experience less pain. So yeah, and I don't find that at all outside of the realm, especially
Mhm.
given this study.
Mhm.
Uh, Gosh, I think it was either published in, I think I want to say 21 or 22. COVID has gotten me messed up on
Timelines. Yes.
timelines, right?
Oh, they were.
But if anybody's interested, they can just email me, and I can share the reference with them. But yeah, yeah, the
Mhm.
brain is capable of so much. And to that point that I was making, whatever we practice regularly gets stronger. So if
Mhm.
we practice fear regularly, the fear, the pain will get stronger. If we practice calm and joy and awareness, that too can get stronger and can improve things for us.
Whew, done. Um,
I
is there
feel
any,
I was
pardon me?
I was going to say, I feel like we've just really hit
Yeah,
the tip of the iceberg here. It it's a fascinating
it is
study.
fast.
I went really down the rabbit hole when I started on this journey, and I just, every single time I'm just like, isn't that amazing? Like COVID, long COVID. They're starting to really believe that long COVID would fall into this category of chronic
Wow.
pain. There was a study in France. I believe it was France. They had two groups: people who were positive for COVID, i.e., their blood tests demonstrated they were positive for COVID. There was a second group whose blood tests demonstrated they had not had COVID. Within each group, there was a group of people who believed they had COVID, whether or not they did, and a group who believed they didn't have COVID, whether or not they did. In both cases, whether they had COVID or didn't have COVID, if they believed they had COVID, they had more symptoms of fatigue, confusion, etc.
Wow.
I, I
That's my,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I could ramble, as I said earlier. I could
Yeah, I
ramble
feel like
about this
we could do
all
an
day.
entire podcast conversation on the effects of COVID. And um oh my gosh, I just, this is so fascinating, Dawn.
It fascinates me all the time, which is really why I jumped down that rabbit hole with 2 feet.
What I'd love to do in the show notes is put your contact information and maybe some of your top resources, Dawn, for people who are just, this was just scratching the surface and they want to they want to dive into this world. If we could put a couple of resources for them in the show notes of
Yeah.
where to start this exploration, and then if they want to work with a coach like you, who I highly recommend, we'll put your contact information and your website details there. This was fascinating. Um, so I love to end our conversations with like a kind of a wrap up, an anchor question, which is what's the one thing you're walking away with in this conversation? What's that golden nugget? Um, Michelle, what's your golden nugget after having this conversation with Dawn?
I feel like I had so many actually. Like one is I'm going to share a couple. The first is there were so many moments, Dawn, when you were talking and sharing the reality of what you believe and what, what studies are showing, that it just strikes me as so empowering. I know we've already said this, but it's like I am so glad that that is the reality. That means so much is possible. And I don't think I've ever really experienced pain that would fall in the category of chronic pain, or that I've labeled that, but I get aches and pains in certain patterns in similar places, and they bug me. And now I'm like, oh, this applies to me too. Like this applies to me, and it's I hope this inspiration lasts. You know what I mean? I'm looking forward to those moments where I feel a little flare up of pain and I can go, okay, what is happening here? What's happening with my neck when it gets yeah. So I'm feeling really kind of a little excited that that all of this really does apply to me. And I think the last golden nugget I'm having is related to, it kind of came through when you were talking about the pain with birth. And one connection I'm making for myself is the connection between pain and fear. That's really coming into focus. I really do notice that that's very true for me. When I'm scared, my pain levels for sure go up. And I even notice it between my two births. I did not have a pain-free orgasmic birth by any means, but my first birth, it was very long and very painful. And because I was really scared, I was scared of all the complications. And the second one, still painful, still falls into the top 2 most painful things I've ever experienced. However, the pain level was so much lower because there was so much of it that wasn't scary. Like actually most of my labor up until the moment where I needed to start pushing, the pain was very tolerable because that part wasn't scary. But the pain kicked in at the scary part. The baby coming through, my brain was still like, oh, is this part scary? And so I think that's something, I think that's the thing I want to remember and take with me. I want to remember that when I'm feeling pain, I'm normally really scared. I really want to remember that in the moments where I'm feeling pain. And then I think the question I'll ask myself is, what am I really scared of right now? I think that's going to be very enlightening for me if I can really remember that and ask myself that in days to come.
That's a really key realization. And, it relates to that danger signal, right? So fear and pain are hugely connected. People with back pain may fear certain movements, which then sets up that danger signal. So working with that fear, not trying to make it go away, but just working with that fear and looking underneath it, what is it about is really, really important. And I really appreciate you bringing that up because I don't think I really emphasized that as much as I could have today. I talked a lot about the danger signal in the brain, but that fear is a really big component of it, right? Because the more we fear something, the brain is kind of going, oh shit, like what do I do now? And yeah.
Okay, Taryn, what's your golden nugget? What are you walking away with?
I have many. I think one of the biggest ones that is sticking out the most is Dawn, in this conversation, you have really powerfully reminded me of the power of our brain. And what feels most relevant for me right now, because I don't have chronic pain in this moment. However, what you've most powerfully reminded me of today is the discomfort, or the emotional pain, the discomfort, like the uncomfortable emotional pain, and how powerful our brains are at even healing that and transforming that, and that the more I do that, the more I retrain my brain for future. So sometimes I have this tendency of, this was uncomfortable, I want to eliminate it from my life. I don't want to do that thing anymore. I just want to eliminate it. And that's not, first of all, it's not always possible. And secondly, it might not always be the answer either. It's, how could I actually train myself to just not be so afraid of this situation, uncomfortable inside of this situation? Like, that's all in my power. And this whole conversation has just really, really reminded me of that. And what I'm going to take away and really contemplate after this conversation is, like, to put my finger on those areas of my life where I feel that. And I'm already starting to think of what those are now, but there's certain areas, specifically in entrepreneurship and business, where I'm like, I just want to eliminate that thing from my experience completely. But if I can put my finger on it and say, what if I didn't eliminate it? What if I could transform it? Like, what if it caused no emotional reaction in me? What then? Like, what could be possible for my life if I took that kind of ownership and control over my own experience? If my brain is truly creating my experiences, I have power.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And I love that too, because, you know, we shy away from emotions, and we're often taught that from an early age, right? Parents who may be trying to comfort us say, don't cry, don't cry. And you start to learn that it's not acceptable to cry. Or if you're in a certain situation where it's not acceptable to show anger. So from a very early age, we can learn that it's not safe to feel our emotions. And so we really struggle with that. And I think that's true of so very many people. You know, and what if we were to just sit with that emotion? There's a book, and of course, the name of the author escapes me, but again, I'll send that to you so you can put it in the notes. She talks about, you know, an emotion only lasts for about 90 seconds, right? And then it's over, unless in your brain, you go back and you revisit it again and again, and then it's going to feel like that emotion never goes away. But if you allow that emotion to go through you, to feel it, typically it'll only last about 90 minutes. And emotions are really powerful. Again, like pain, it's a message.
Yeah.
It's a message that somebody's broken your boundaries, or you don't sit right with something. It doesn't align with your values or your ethics, or, you know, what you want.
There's a limiting belief that you're seeing this from. I'm not enough, or I'm not, you know, there's a message in that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think emotions are so powerful, like pain, because it is a message that, if you pay attention to it and listen to it, you know, kind of with an open expression, you can learn a lot, a lot. Yeah. 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 And, like I like to say the body doesn't lie. It's speaking to us all the time. And I've given you a quote. It is in my bio and will be in the notes. It's a great quote because it's true. The body doesn't lie. Those emotions, that flush of embarrassment, the back pain, messages from our brain through our body.
Dawn, this was thank you so much for being a guest on our show and for sharing your wisdom, your passion, your life's work. It was, and I know we just scratched the surface, but this was incredibly insightful, and I thank you so much.
I appreciate being here. I adore you. I adore you both. You have given me so much, and I really appreciate being here. And hopefully, this might help give somebody, a bit of a glimmer, a little bit of hope for recovery in their own life.
Thank you so much for listening. For more information, you can visit our website at www.themindrebel.com or visit us on Instagram or Facebook at the_mind_rebel_academy. And these links can all be found in the show notes below. If you like this episode, we would be so grateful if you shared it with your fellow bold dreamers.